Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're heading into the Pacific Northwest, to a place that honestly already has me feeling a little spooked just thinking about it.
Oh, yeah.
We're going deep into Bigfoot country to try and unpack this legend. And we'll be using an excerpt from the Oregon Encyclopedia as our main source, which is full of all kinds of great historical details and local flavor. So, get ready. Because we're going to try to figure out if Bigfoot is a real undiscovered species or just a figment of our collective imagination.
Right.
Which may be something in between.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole legend goes way back. It's not just a modern thing.
Yeah.
Like, there are documented accounts of sightings that go back over a century. Like, imagine you're a settler back in 1904 exploring the Sixes River area in Oregon, and all of a sudden, there are all these reports of this hairy wild man in the woods.
Wow.
And then just a few decades later in 1924, you've got miners on Mount St. Helens claiming they were attacked by these giant apes. And these weren't just like rumors. These reports were actually printed in Oregon newspapers.
So these accounts were taken seriously enough to actually be in the newspapers. Wow. It really makes you wonder if there was something real that sparked all these stories.
Right. And here's where it gets even more interesting. A lot of these stories kind of overlap with Native American lore. Tribes in this region have these stories that go way back about these figures called Siatko, or stick Indians. And these figures were like hairy, wild men of the woods. Sometimes they were seen as protectors, and sometimes they were seen as more menacing figures.
It's almost like the seeds of the Bigfoot legend were already planted long before the 20th century.
Exactly. And then when the settlers arrived and they started having these encounters in the wilderness, it's almost like these ancient stories kind of got reawakened and took on this new form in the shape of Bigfoot.
And wasn't there this huge surge in sightings during like the logging boom of the mid-20th century?
Absolutely. The timing is really interesting. It's like all that logging activity and pushing deeper into the forests kind of stirred something up.
Yeah, I guess if you were Bigfoot and your home was suddenly being invaded, you might want to make your presence known too.
Yeah.
But how did all this impact the culture of these logging communities? It must have been more than just fear, right?
Oh, definitely. Bigfoot actually became a big part of logging culture.
Really?
Like, think pranks, chainsaw sculptures of Bigfoot, and even a whole research center devoted to Bigfoot.
A research center?
Yeah, the Bigfoot Information Center in the Dalles.
Wow.
Founded by a former Yeti hunter named Peter Byrne.
A Yeti hunter turned Bigfoot researcher. Now that's a career shift. But wait, didn't Byrne actually collect some pretty compelling evidence? I vaguely remember something about footprints and maybe even vocalizations.
He did. Byrne was really meticulous. He documented tons of eyewitness testimonies, and he carefully analyzed those footprints, and he was totally convinced that they pointed to a brand new, undiscovered primate species. And he wasn't alone. There were some anthropologists, like Jeff Meldrum, who studied foot morphology and biomechanics, and they argued that those footprints couldn't have been easily hoaxed. And then you have Grover Krantz, who not only examine footprints, but also that really famous 1967 film footage. And he claimed it showed a creature with a really unique gait and musculature.
So there's some serious scientific weight behind these claims. But I'm curious, what about the skeptics? The scientific community seems pretty divided on Bigfoot's existence.
Well, most scientists attribute the sightings to misidentification. Like maybe people are seeing bears or even other people dressed up as Bigfoot.
Right.
They also point to the lack of conclusive physical evidence, like an actual body or a skeleton. And they argue that hoaxes are another big factor, especially with that grainy 1967 footage, which some people claim was staged.
So it's like this back and forth between believers and skeptics, with each side having their own interpretations of the evidence. It's like a classic mystery, with all these tantalizing clues, but no definitive answers.
Exactly. But it's important to remember, just because we haven't found conclusive evidence doesn't automatically mean Bigfoot doesn't exist. The wilderness is huge, and it holds a lot of secrets. Like, think about the okapi. That large mammal related to the giraffe, it was only discovered in the dense rainforests of Central Africa in the 20th century.
Wow.
So who knows what else might be out there?
That's a good point. It's like we're constantly rediscovering the world around us, even in this day and age. But I want to shift gears for a moment. We've talked about the history and the science, but there's this whole other side to Bigfoot. Its cultural significance.
Absolutely. And this is where things get even more fascinating.
Okay.
For a lot of Native American communities, Bigfoot isn't just a legend, it's an important part of their spiritual beliefs and traditions.
I'm really interested in learning more about the Native American perspective.
Yeah.
We briefly talked about stick Indians earlier, but what are they exactly? What role do they play in these cultures?
Well, for the Nehalem Tillamook people, for instance, they have these ancient tales about wild men that lurked near villages, leaving behind giant tracks, and sometimes they would even interact with humans. These wild men were seen as these really powerful figures, sometimes dangerous, but definitely connected to the spirit world. And then you have the plateau tribes, like those at the Warm Springs Reservation, who identify Bigfoot as a stick Indian.
And what does stick Indian actually signify? Is it similar to this wild man concept?
Yeah, it is, but with some nuances. Stick Indians are often believed to have supernatural powers, and they're sometimes seen as protectors of the land, but also as beings that could cause harm. If they're disrespected, they represent a really strong connection to the pre-contact past, and they embody the resilience of indigenous cultural heritage in the face of things like colonization and assimilation.
So these stories that have been passed down through generations serve as this powerful link to their ancestral knowledge and ways of life.
Exactly. For these communities, Bigfoot isn't just a creature. It's a symbol of their cultural identity and their relationship with the natural world.
It makes you wonder, what is it about Bigfoot that makes it such a powerful symbol? Why has it resonated so deeply across cultures and time?
That's a great question, and one we'll keep exploring. As we dive deeper into this topic, it's like Bigfoot's this mirror to our own fascination with the unknown. You know, it represents that wild, untamed part of the world that still exists, even in our increasingly urbanized, technology-driven lives.
Yeah, it's like this primal yearning for something beyond ourselves, something mysterious and powerful.
Absolutely. And there's definitely a thrill that comes with that possibility, that there might be these creatures out there that we haven't discovered yet.
You're right. And it's not just limited to Native American cultures or people in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
Think about it. Bigfoot is everywhere. In pop culture, across the globe.
Exactly.
Cheesy horror movies,
Yeah.
children's cartoons. It's this quirky icon, like a mascot for the weird and wonderful.
And some writers and thinkers, they see Bigfoot as more than just entertainment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They use Bigfoot as this symbol to explore our relationship with the natural world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. How do they actually use Bigfoot to explore these deeper themes?
We'll look at David Rains Wallace's work. He uses the Bigfoot legend to kind of explore that tension between human development and wilderness preservation. It's like Bigfoot becomes this symbol for the wild itself that's constantly being threatened by encroaching civilization.
So it's not just about finding Bigfoot. It's about understanding our impact on the environment and protecting those wild spaces.
Exactly. And then you have Robert Michael Pyle. He's a naturalist and writer, and he sees Bigfoot as the symbol of the edges.
The edges.
Yeah, those spaces where civilization meets wilderness, those liminal spaces. Bigfoot embodies the mystery and allure of those in-between places.
It's like those areas hold a special kind of magic where different realities can intersect.
Exactly. And then there's Molly Gloss, another writer from the Pacific Northwest, and she uses the Bigfoot myth to examine things like gender roles and power dynamics between men and women in society. Her Bigfoot is really complex, both feared and revered.
Wow.
So it reflects the complexity of human relationships.
So Bigfoot's this lens through which we can examine all these societal issues and cultural anxieties.
Right, and it all goes back to that idea of Bigfoot as this mirror, reflecting our hopes and fears and anxieties about our place in the world.
Now, this whole conversation reminds me of another iconic symbol of the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, yeah.
The salmon.
That's a great connection. Both Bigfoot and salmon have become so intertwined with the identity of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
They represent this untamed spirit, this connection to a wilder way of life.
Yeah, and both are facing their own challenges. Salmon populations are struggling because of habitat loss and overfishing. And Bigfoot, well, he's still out there, maybe trying to avoid us altogether.
It's a reminder that even as we try to understand these creatures, our actions have a real impact on their survival.
So how do we reconcile that? On the one hand, we have this fascination with these creatures that embody wildness, but on the other hand, we're encroaching on their habitat, putting their very existence at risk.
It's a really tough balance, and it's something that we as a society are still figuring out. I think part of the solution is recognizing that we're not separate from nature. We're all connected, and our actions have consequences.
So it's not about conquering nature. It's about coexisting, living in harmony with these wild spaces and the creatures that live there.
Exactly, and maybe that's the biggest lesson. We can learn from Bigfoot. It's a call to respect the unknown, to acknowledge the power of the natural world, and to recognize that our own survival depends on it.
It's a reminder that there's still so much we don't know, so much out there to discover.
And maybe the most important discoveries aren't about finding new creatures, but about rediscovering our own place in the world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. The history, the science, Native American lore, pop culture, even literature. But it still feels like we're just scratching the surface.
You're absolutely right. The Bigfoot phenomenon is so complex, there's always more to uncover.
So where do we go from here? What's the next step?
Well, I think it's time to step back and look at the big picture. We've looked at all these different parts of the Bigfoot legend, but what does it all mean? What can we actually learn from this mystery?
I'm all ears. What's the big takeaway?
For me, the most interesting thing about Bigfoot is its ability to tap into our fear and fascination with the unknown. It reminds us that there are still mysteries out there, in the wilderness, things we can't easily explain.
Like a little voice in the back of our minds, whispering, what if?
Yeah.
What if there really is something out there that science can't explain?
Right. And in a world that often feels so predictable, that little spark of the unknown can be really alluring.
It's like Bigfoot represents this rebellion against our need to control everything. It reminds us that there are forces out there we don't fully understand.
That can be a little scary, but it can also be inspiring. It reminds us that the world is still full of surprises.
So it's not just about believing or disbelieving in Bigfoot. It's about embracing that sense of wonder, that curiosity about the world around us.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by staying open-minded and curious, we'll make our own amazing discoveries, even if they're not as elusive as Bigfoot.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've explored the history, the science, the culture, the symbolism of the Bigfoot legend, and honestly, I have more questions now than answers.
That's the point. The Bigfoot legend is all about embracing the unknown, recognizing that there are things we just don't understand.
And maybe that's a good thing. A little mystery keeps us searching, exploring, discovering.
So to our listeners, the next time you're out in the wilderness, take a moment to listen. Pay attention to those rustling leaves, the shadows in the trees. You never know what you might find or what you might learn about yourself along the way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Bigfoot country. Until next time, keep exploring.
You know, it's funny how a creature like Bigfoot, whether it's real or not, can spark all these big questions about our place in the world.
It really is. It kind of speaks to the power of stories and myths and legends to shape how we see ourselves and the world. Okay, so let's think about our listener for a second. Maybe they're totally intrigued, maybe they're a little skeptical, but they're definitely curious. What would you want them to take away from this deep dive?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is, don't be afraid to question things, to explore, to keep an open mind. The world is full of mysteries. And I think that's what makes life so interesting.
It's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Exactly. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a good reminder to stay humble, to be open to new possibilities, and never lose that sense of wonder.
So maybe the Bigfoot legend isn't really about finding a creature. It's about rediscovering that sense of wonder, that curiosity about the world.
I think so. Who knows? Maybe by staying curious, we'll make some amazing discoveries of our own, even if they're not quite as elusive as Bigfoot.
I think that's the perfect place to wrap things up. We've explored the history, the science, the culture, and all the symbolism surrounding Bigfoot. And I have to admit, I still have way more questions than answers.
But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the Bigfoot legend is all about learning to be comfortable with the unknown, with the idea that there's some things we just might never fully understand.
Maybe. A little mystery is a good thing.
I think so. It keeps us searching, exploring, keeps us on our toes. So, to everyone listening, next time you're out in nature, really take a moment to listen. Pay attention to the sounds, the sights. You never know what you might find or what you might discover about yourself.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.